He was a CEO, focused on success, until a little girl handed him a crayon drawing that reopened a door to a forgotten life. Could this simple gesture lead him to the brother he thought he'd lost forever? The ballroom shimmered with warm lights and polished marble, the kind of setting where conversations floated on soft jazz and every wineglass gleamed like crystal. Executives in sleek black suits and elegant dresses mingled around tall tables, discussing profits and design trends. At the center of it all stood Oliver Blackstone, CEO of Blackstone Interiors, known for transforming spaces into empires of modern luxury. At 34, he was sharp, composed, always 2 steps ahead in every conversation. He didn't host these events to socialize, he hosted them to win, to remind people that he'd built something from nothing, and that nothing could shake it now. But then she appeared. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, wearing a mismatched pink cardigan over a polka-dot dress, her shoes scuffed at the toes. Her brown curls bounced with each step as she weaved through the crowd like a thread out of place in a perfect pattern. No one stopped her. No one noticed. No one except Oliver, who watched as the little girl approached him with the seriousness of someone delivering news. She didn't speak, just stood there beside him, her small hand gripping a folded piece of paper. He looked down, surprised, brows drawing together as she gently held it out to him. "What's this?" he asked, kneeling slightly to meet her at eye level. The girl gave a tiny shrug, then whispered, "It's you and me, I think." Curious despite himself, Oliver unfolded the paper. It was done in crayon, bold and clumsy and sincere. A crooked yellow house sat under a blue sky. 2 stick figures stood in front of it, one taller with black hair, the other smaller, with big loops for curls. Above them, in careful block letters, were 2 names, Lottie and Ollie. Ollie. The name hit him like a wave he hadn't seen coming. He stared at the drawing longer than he meant to, his gaze catching on the way the trees bent toward the house, the swing hanging from the thickest branch, the little details that didn't feel random. It wasn't just a child's imagination. It looked like something remembered. "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice low. Lottie rocked on her heels. "I draw what I dream. Sometimes I dream about places I've never been, but I know them anyway." Before he could say anything else, a woman hurried over, her face flushed with concern. "Lottie, there you are. I'm so sorry," she said to Oliver, gently taking the girl's hand. "She must have slipped away from me." Oliver nodded absently, eyes still on the drawing. The woman, Claire, her name tag read, offered a polite smile and an apology before guiding Lottie back toward the edge of the crowd. The girl glanced back once, her gaze steady, then disappeared among the adults. He stood there for a moment longer, the drawing still in his hands. Something about it gnawed at him. Not just the name, not just the house, but the feeling it left behind. A tug in his chest he hadn't felt in years, like a whisper from another life. He folded the paper carefully, slid it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, and resumed his role among the guests. But his mind wasn't on the company's latest line or the champagne anymore. It was on a yellow house, a swing under a tree, and a name he hadn't heard since he was a boy. Ollie. The morning after the event, Oliver Blackstone sat alone in his high-rise office, staring out at the skyline like it held answers he didn't want to ask for. The city was quiet at this hour, just before the rush, before people flooded the sidewalks and the world started demanding again. He liked this time of day. It was clean, still, easy to control. His coffee sat untouched on the table beside him. The drawing was still folded in his suit pocket from the night before. He hadn't planned to keep it, but something about tossing it in the trash felt wrong. So he'd slipped it into his coat, told himself it was nothing, and left it there. Oliver was not the kind of man who believed in signs. He didn't put stock in dreams or symbols or crayon sketches from small children who wandered into corporate functions. His world was numbers, structure, clean designs, and measurable results. He had built Blackstone interiors from the ground up, starting with freelance drafts and a borrowed laptop, growing it into a multi-million-dollar brand featured in every top-tier lifestyle magazine. Everything in his life was curated, designed, calculated for success. Emotions, for the most part, had no place in it. He had learned early on that feelings were unpredictable. They made people messy, reckless, distracted. He'd watched it happen to others, how heartbreak ruined good men, how longing made smart women foolish. He had no time for that. Not when every step of his life had been a climb, and every hand offered to him had been another test. So he built walls, strong ones, around his heart, his past, his memories. He polished his image like marble, made sure no one got too close, made sure everyone respected the boundaries he never had to say out loud. He was kind enough in meetings, generous in business deals, even gracious when he remembered to be. But warm? No. Warmth was for people with safer lives. He finally pulled the drawing from his pocket, smoothing the folds out on his desk. The colors were too bright for this sterile office, too innocent for the cold gray of the city beyond the glass. That crooked yellow house, it didn't belong in his world. But it pulled at him anyway. The name Ollie, scrawled in childish letters, curled like smoke through his mind. No one called him that anymore. No one even knew to. For a moment, he let his mind drift, not willingly, but the way a locked door sometimes creaks open from memory alone. He saw a small swing hanging from a tree, felt the scratch of dry grass under his knees, heard laughter, his own, lighter than it had been in years. He pushed the image away quickly, snapping back to the present, his face unreadable once more. It was probably a coincidence. Just a kid with a good imagination. That's what he told himself as he refolded the paper and tucked it into his desk drawer. A fluke. Nothing more. Still, he didn't throw it away. Claire Danner had told the nanny to keep a close eye on Lottie. It was a simple request, nothing out of the ordinary. They were attending a corporate mixer at the Blackstone Gallery, and although Claire had been invited to speak about a children's literacy program, she knew it wasn't a place for a 7-year-old. But childcare had fallen through last minute, and Lottie had begged to come. Just for an hour, she'd said. She promised to be quiet, to sit with her coloring books and not get in the way. Claire had hesitated, then agreed, on the condition that the nanny, Marta, stay close at all times. But events like these had a way of pulling everyone in different directions. People asked questions, servers moved in and out, music played low beneath the hum of adult conversations. And Marta, caught in a phone call with her sister back home in the Philippines, stepped just a few feet away to find better reception. Just for a moment. Just to answer one quick question. That moment was all Lottie needed. She wasn't being sneaky. Not really. She was just curious. The room was full of shiny things and interesting people, and Lottie was the kind of child who followed her thoughts wherever they led. She wandered through the crowd holding her crayon, drawing in both hands, scanning faces until she found the one she'd seen in her dreams, the man in the dark suit with the quiet eyes. She didn't know how she knew it was him. She just did. By the time Marta realized Lottie was gone, her heart jumped into her throat. She turned in frantic circles, scanning the ballroom, calling her name softly so as not to make a scene. Claire, on the far side of the room talking with one of the board members, hadn't noticed yet. Marta wove through the crowd, her voice rising a little with each step, panic building like heat in her chest. And then she saw her. Lottie, standing beside Oliver Blackstone, the CEO himself, holding out a crumpled piece of paper like it was the most important thing in the world. Marta froze, horrified. She watched Oliver kneel, take the paper, and actually look at it. Really look at it. He didn't seem annoyed. He didn't wave her away. Instead, he stared at the drawing like it meant something, something he hadn't expected to see. Marta rushed forward, apologizing before she even reached them. She took Lottie's hand gently, her words tumbling out in flustered sentences. Lottie didn't resist, didn't complain. She just looked back at Oliver as she was led away, her expression calm, almost knowing. Oliver barely noticed Marta's apology. He barely heard her at all. His eyes were still on the drawing, the crooked lines, the yellow house, the names written in uneven crayon. Lottie and Ollie. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew it wasn't nothing. He stayed like that for a long time after they were gone, the noise of the event fading behind him, the paper warm in his hand, and a feeling creeping into his chest that he couldn't quite name. Something old, something he thought he'd left behind. The rain tapped softly against the glass windows of Oliver's penthouse, a quiet rhythm that usually soothed him after long days filled with boardrooms and deadlines. But tonight, nothing soothed. He lay awake longer than usual, his bedroom dark except for the dim city glow that crept through the curtains. The drawing sat on his nightstand now, its colors dulled in the shadows, but still stubbornly present, like a whisper refusing to be ignored. He closed his eyes to sleep, but the images came quickly, uninvited and too sharp to be dreams. A yellow house, faded and chipped, with weeds growing through cracks in the path, and shutters hanging crooked from their hinges. The air smelled of dust and grass and old memories. He was there, but smaller, barefoot on the porch steps, watching as a little girl with pigtails and mismatched socks tugged on a frayed rope tied to a broken swing. Her laugh carried through the warm air, high and wild, the kind that belonged to children who didn't know yet what it meant to be left behind. She called him Ollie, not Oliver, never that. Ollie, like it was a secret name meant only for her and him. The dream shifted. He was inside now, in a small room with peeling wallpaper and a mattress on the floor. A plastic bin held a few books and crayons, the same kind Lottie had used. He was drawing too, two stick figures under a tree, their hands touching, the sun smiling down on them. He didn't remember the rest, not clearly, but the feeling stayed, a weight in his chest. The kind that came with being pulled away from something too soon. He woke with a jolt, his sheets twisted, his breathing uneven. The clock read 4:11 a.m., but it could have been any time. The city outside was still glowing, still pulsing with late-night life, but inside his room, everything felt too quiet. He turned on the bedside lamp and picked up the drawing again, studying every stroke like it might give him a clue. The yellow house, the swing, the names, Lottie and Ollie. The name felt too familiar now, too specific to be coincidence. He hadn't heard it in years, decades maybe. But the sound of it echoed in his head like a bell, shaking dust off old corners of his memory. The dream wasn't just fantasy. It was something real, something buried. He ran a hand down his face and sat on the edge of the bed, heart still unsettled. The air felt too thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. Who was she? He asked it out loud this time, his voice rough in the silence. Who is Lottie? He had everything: money, power, control. But that one question now tugged at him harder than anything else. And worse, he knew it wouldn't leave him alone, not until he found the answer. Oliver arrived at the office early, well before his staff filtered in with their coffees and confident strides. The world outside was still half asleep, but he was wide awake, driven by something he didn't quite understand. He hadn't shaken the dream, and the drawing remained tucked inside his leather briefcase, folded neatly beside contracts and design proposals, the colors a strange contrast to his otherwise precise world. By 9, his executive assistant, Serena, stepped into his office with her usual calm grace. She carried a sleek tablet, a printed folder, and the practiced ease of someone who managed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. "Morning, Oliver. I pulled the guest list from last Friday's mixer, as you requested." He nodded, keeping his voice even. Was there a Claire Danner on that list? Serena tapped her tablet, scrolling until she found the name. Claire Danner. Yes, she was invited to present her nonprofit's literacy program. The event planner marked her as one of the lower priority speakers. No formal pitch scheduled. She brought a guest, listed as a child. No name recorded. Oliver leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. And what does Claire do exactly? She's a teacher and runs a literacy nonprofit for children in foster care. Been operating for 6 years. Modest funding, mostly community-level support. That word again, foster. And the child? He asked, trying to sound detached. Serena glanced up, sensing the interest behind his question. No formal records, but I cross-checked her name. Claire Danner is a certified foster parent. She currently has one placement. A girl named Charlotte. Goes by Lottie. Oliver stared at the name on the screen, letting it settle. Charlotte, Lottie. The girl with the crayon drawing and the eyes that didn't blink when they looked at him. Have legal pull whatever public records we can find. I want to know more about Claire Danner. Where she's been placed, what her foster history looks like. Everything that's available. Serena hesitated. Is there something I should know? Oliver shook his head, but his voice was softer now. Just follow the thread. Quietly. She nodded once and left the room without further question. She'd worked for him long enough to recognize when he didn't want to explain himself, and he rarely asked for personal information unless there was a reason. Once alone again, Oliver stood and moved to the window. The city stretched below him, shining with certainty and order. But inside, something was shifting. He'd told himself the drawing was nothing, just a fluke, but that story no longer fit. The name, the memory, the foster connection. It was all pointing somewhere he wasn't ready to admit existed. Claire wasn't her mother. That part mattered. This child wasn't just tagging along with a parent. She was in the system. A system he once knew from the inside. A system that tore people apart and never told them where the other half went. He exhaled slowly, the glass cool under his palm. He didn't know what he was looking for yet, but he was going to find it. The conference room was designed to impress, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek walnut table, and art pieces curated by interior designers who understood the value of silence and space. Oliver sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his hands folded, the drawing tucked neatly into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He told himself this was just another meeting, another conversation to check a box. But the moment Claire Danner walked in, with Lottie beside her holding a canvas bag full of crayons, he knew it wasn't going to be simple. Claire was composed in a way that didn't try to impress. She wore a navy cardigan, a well-loved tote slung over one shoulder, and her eyes held the kind of calm that came from years of showing up for people who didn't always say thank you. She smiled politely but with caution, the way someone might smile at a man who had too much power and too many questions. Mr. Blackstone, she said, extending a hand. Thank you for following up. I didn't expect it, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk more about the program. Please, call me Oliver, he replied smoothly, standing just long enough to offer his hand before motioning toward the seats across from him. And I appreciate you making the time. Your nonprofit, it left an impression. Claire nodded once, sitting down as Lottie wandered toward the corner of the room, already pulling paper and crayons from her bag. She didn't say a word, just settled cross-legged on the carpet by the window, humming softly to herself as she began to draw. Oliver kept his gaze steady, his tone professional. I reviewed your proposal. It's well thought out, targeted. I think there's real potential in what you're building. Claire tilted her head, not fooled. But I'm curious about your background, he said. Why this work? Why children in foster care? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Why does anyone do something hard? Because they know what it's like. Because someone helped them once. Or didn't. Because they see the gap and can't ignore it. And Lottie? He asked, his voice gentler now. Claire paused. She's with me through a temporary placement. We don't know yet what long-term looks like. But for now, she's mine to protect. Oliver glanced toward the little girl in the corner, her hair falling over one shoulder as she drew thick strokes of green across the paper. She gave me a drawing the other night. Claire didn't answer, but he saw her shoulders shift slightly. She was listening more carefully now. It caught me off guard, he continued. The details, the names she used. It brought up something I thought I'd forgotten. Claire's voice was soft, but steady. She draws what she dreams. Sometimes the dreams mean something, sometimes they don't. He looked back at her, searching for something. But you believe there's truth in them. I believe children carry more than we understand, she said. Especially children who've been through the system. They watch. They remember. Even if they don't know why. Lottie glanced up then, as if she sensed they were talking about her. She didn't speak, just slid the paper across the floor toward him without a word. He walked over and picked it up slowly. This one was different. 3 figures this time. 2 taller ones and a child in between, holding both hands. Above them were 3 names, written in careful crayon. Claire, Lottie, and Ollie. Oliver didn't speak. He didn't move. And for the first time in years, something inside him began to crack. Oliver sat at his desk long after Claire and Lottie had left. The second drawing resting in front of him, its colors brighter than they had any right to be. He'd tried to return to his routine, meetings, emails, performance reports, but his mind kept circling back to the same place. The tree, the names, the impossible familiarity. Ollie and Charlie. The names were written just below 2 stick figures sitting beneath a wide tree, its branches curling over them like a canopy. One figure had black scribbled hair and a small red mark under the chin. The other had lighter hair and a green shirt. Oliver hadn't noticed the mark at first, but now he couldn't stop staring at it. He reached up without thinking and touched the faint scar just below his chin, hidden by a clean shave and years of forgetting. He hadn't heard that name in 25 years. Charlie, his little brother. The name hit like a stone dropped into deep water. He sat back slowly, letting the past rise up from the depths he thought he'd buried it in. He was 6 again, sitting on the floor of a foster home, watching his brother build towers from plastic blocks. Charlie had been younger, maybe 4, always trailing behind him, always calling him Ollie, in that cheerful sing-song voice. He remembered holding Charlie's hand when a social worker had come to visit, both of them hiding behind a couch because they knew what visits meant. Visits meant separation, meant new homes, meant goodbye. He had promised Charlie they would stay together, that he would never let anyone take them apart. And then they did. Oliver remembered the morning clearly now. The woman had shown up in a blue dress with a smile too bright. She had crouched down and said, "Charlie, sweetie, you're coming with me today." He remembered the screaming. Charlie, crying, grabbing his arm, holding on with small hands that weren't strong enough. Oliver had fought, begged, pleaded, but in the end, they had pulled his brother away and closed the car door. He never saw Charlie again. Oliver had been moved to a different home a month later, then another, then again. He stopped asking questions. He stopped saying Charlie's name out loud. It hurt too much. Over time, the memories became faded pictures in a closed book, until now. He looked again at the drawing, the names scribbled in crayon. Lottie couldn't have known. No one could have. He had never told anyone about Charlie. Not Serena, not his board, not even Claire. So how did Lottie dream of it? He didn't know if it was chance or some strange pull between broken pieces trying to find each other. But the drawing was more than just memory. It was a map, a door swinging open. And for the first time in years, Oliver wasn't sure what scared him more, the memories, or the hope that Charlie might still be out there. The city moved like it always did, fast and polished, humming with ambition. But Oliver walked through it feeling disconnected, like he was watching it all through glass. The sidewalk buzzed with conversation. Car horns echoed in the distance, and designer storefronts gleamed under the afternoon sun. None of it touched him. Not today. Back in his office, he loosened his tie and sat down slowly, ignoring the messages blinking on his phone, the emails stacking up on his screen. His team could wait. The company could run itself for a day. He reached into the drawer and pulled out the crayon drawings again, smoothing the creases with careful fingers. Ollie and Charlie under a tree? The memory had returned like a wave in the dark, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. But now, in the light of day, he tried to shut it down again. Logic took over, the way it always had. He told himself, Lottie could have guessed. Maybe she'd heard something, maybe Claire said something without realizing. Maybe Lottie had heard the name Charlie somewhere, and it just landed in the right place by accident. Kids made things up. They mixed truth with dreams, stitched memories together from hints and stories and feelings they didn't understand. This could all be imagination. He told himself that over and over, each time he looked at the paper. But the lie didn't hold. Because Lottie didn't just draw names. She drew places. She drew the tree, the swing, the crooked house with chipped shutters and wild weeds in the front yard. She drew his past without ever having seen it. She brought back things Oliver had spent years burying under success, under routines, under suits, and clean office lines. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and pressed his fingertips to his temples. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He wasn't supposed to feel this pulled. He had built a life that didn't have room for unfinished business or emotional detours. He wore purpose like a tailored suit. Every step he took was measured. And now, here was this little girl, cracking through the armor with a crayon. If she knew Charlie, if she'd seen something or someone, then that meant his brother might still be alive, still out there, still wondering what happened, just like he had all those years ago. But what would he even say if he found him? Sorry for disappearing? Sorry for forgetting the sound of your voice, the exact shade of your hair, the way you called me Ollie, like it was your favorite word? He rubbed the back of his neck and stared out the window. The skyline offered no answers. It never did. He was a man who prided himself on knowing things before they happened. He saw patterns before others did, predicted trends, built empires from instinct and insight. But this was different. This wasn't strategy. It was memory. It was loss, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance. Claire arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, but Oliver was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and a notebook he hadn't opened. He stood when he saw her, polite as always, his movements precise, practiced. She gave a tight smile, set her purse down, and slid into the seat across from him. The clatter of spoons and low chatter filled the space, but between them, there was a quiet tension that neither one tried to smooth over. I was surprised by your call, Claire said, folding her hands on the table. Is this about the literacy program, or something else? Oliver hesitated. His suit was immaculate, his watch gleaming beneath his cuff, but his expression didn't match the calm surface he usually presented. It was focused, but not sharp, more searching than sure. He looked at Claire the way someone studies a locked door they need to open. It's about Lottie, he said finally. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly. She's just a child. A bright, thoughtful, unusual child. But still, a child. I know, he said quickly, hands resting flat on the table. I'm not trying to interfere, but something's happened, and I don't know how else to make sense of it without talking to you. Claire nodded slowly, waiting. She gave me a drawing at the mixer, he continued. Then another during our meeting at my office. They're not just drawings. Not to me. Claire's voice dropped, steady and firm. Mr. Blackstone, I've worked in schools and social programs long enough to know how easily children can be used, especially foster kids. People see them as projects, puzzles to solve, stories to reshape into something they can feel good about. I'm not letting that happen to her. If you're chasing something, memories, guilt, closure, I need to know that before this goes any further. Oliver didn't flinch. He nodded, looking down for a moment before meeting her eyes again. You're right to be cautious. I would be too. But I'm not here because I'm chasing nostalgia. I'm here because Lottie's drawings, they unlocked something I hadn't remembered in years. He took a breath. Slower this time. There was a boy in one of the drawings, Charlie. That was my brother's name. We were in foster care together when I was a child. I haven't seen him since we were separated over 20 years ago. Claire said nothing, but her expression shifted, something softening just enough to let him continue. I buried it, he said. The memories, the pain. I built a life that didn't leave space for the past. But Lottie's drawings brought it all back. The names, the places, even the scar under my chin. She sketched it without knowing. She's never heard these stories from me. So either it's coincidence, or, somehow, she's seen something real. Claire leaned back, arms crossed. And what exactly are you hoping to find through her? I don't know yet, Oliver admitted. But I know I can't ignore it. And I won't go around you to figure it out. Claire studied him, measuring every word, every crease of sincerity. She still didn't trust him. Not entirely. But she saw something human behind the polished exterior now. Something raw and honest that no Armani suit could hide. Then you talked to her through me, she said at last. No secrets, no pushing. And if at any point I think she's carrying more weight than she should, I pull back. No questions. Oliver nodded, almost grateful. Deal. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The office at the community center smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. Claire unlocked a gray filing cabinet in the back room, while Oliver stood nearby, hands in his pockets, trying not to look out of place among the cracked linoleum tiles and faded posters about child safety and reading skills. He wasn't used to waiting, especially not in rooms like this. But today was different. Today he needed answers more than control. Claire pulled out a slim manila folder and placed it gently on the desk between them. This is what I have access to, she said. Most of it is just paperwork, placement history, school transfers. Nothing dramatic. But there's a photo attached from her last foster home. I thought, you should see it. Oliver nodded, and for a moment, he just stared at the folder. His heart beat heavier than usual, like it was preparing for something it couldn't quite name. Finally, he reached out and opened it. At the top was Lottie's full name, Charlotte May, written in neat block letters across the case file. Below it were pages filled with social worker notes, transfer dates, and brief summaries of her behavior. Quiet, observant, creative. None of it surprised him. Then he saw the photo paper clipped to the third page. It was a simple picture, probably taken during a home check. Lottie stood between two adults on a porch. The woman had short blonde hair and tired eyes. The man beside her wore a flannel shirt and had a hand resting lightly on Lottie's shoulder. He was smiling, but it wasn't the smile that caught Oliver's attention. It was the eyes. The same dark brown, just a shade too deep. The same shape. The same slight narrowing when the light hit them. The same crease between the brows, like he was always half thinking, even while pretending to relax. Oliver's hand tightened around the photo. What's his name? He asked, though he already felt the answer settling in his chest. Claire leaned in. Charles Reynolds. He was the primary foster guardian at that placement. She lived with him for just under a year before he had to stop fostering due to health issues. They stayed close after. She still talks about him like family. Charlie. He studied the photo again, now unable to see anything else. The slope of the nose, the scar on his chin, in the same spot, Oliver remembered accidentally cutting himself with a bike pedal. He'd forgotten that Charlie had a smaller version of it too. But it was there, Claire was quiet, giving him space. She could see something shifting in his expression, though she didn't yet know what it meant. "This is him," Oliver said, barely above a whisper. "This is my brother." He didn't know whether to sit, or stand, or speak, or stay silent. Everything inside him felt turned around. His little brother hadn't vanished. He hadn't disappeared into the void of a broken system. He had grown up, survived, become someone. And somehow, through fate or chance, or something bigger than either of those, he had ended up in Lottie's life. Claire's voice broke the silence gently. "Do you want to find him?" Oliver nodded slowly, still staring at the image. "I think I have to." Oliver stood in his office, with the blinds drawn halfway, sunlight cutting sharp lines across the floor. The folder sat open on his desk, but he didn't need to look at it anymore. He'd memorized every detail. Charles Reynolds. Lives in a small coastal town 2 hours south. Owns a repair shop off the main road. No social media, no website, no interviews or business features. Just a quiet man fixing broken things, off the radar. Exactly the kind of life someone might choose if they'd spent too long being overlooked. The private investigator he hired had done a thorough job. Discreet, efficient, the way Oliver expected. There were photos, street views, license records, all the basic facts. But the first image, the one that stopped Oliver cold, was a candid shot taken through the open garage door of the repair shop. Charles stood with a wrench in hand, grease on his forearm, laughing at something an older customer had said. His hair was shorter than Oliver remembered, streaked with early gray, but the smile, the posture, the way his left foot turned slightly inward when he leaned back, it all came rushing in like water over cracked pavement. It was him, Charlie. Older, but still him. Oliver closed the folder and set it aside. He pressed his hands against the edge of the desk, trying to steady the rush of emotion building in his chest. He wasn't a man who let himself feel things deeply. Not anymore. Not since those early days when feeling too much had only led to disappointment. But this discovery, wasn't something he could box up and shelve away. He walked to the window, looking out over the skyline of a city that had always made sense to him. Concrete and steel, schedules and structure. He'd built his life on precision, yet now it all felt like a puzzle with a missing corner finally found. He hadn't seen Charlie in over 2 decades. Not since the day they were torn apart in a social worker's office with soft voices and firm hands. Oliver had been moved again. New house, new school, new rules. He'd stopped asking about his brother after the first year, stopped hoping around the second. And somewhere along the way, Charlie had become a memory he didn't let himself visit, until now. He didn't call, not yet. Didn't drive down or send a letter. He wasn't ready for that. But he knew where Charlie was now. Knew that he was alive, that he hadn't vanished into the system, that he'd made a life, even if it was quiet and far away from anything Oliver had built. For the first time in years, Oliver felt something settle. Not peace exactly, but the start of it. A foundation. And though he didn't say it aloud, the thought echoed in his chest like a steady beat. Charlie was still out there. And this time, Oliver wasn't going to let him disappear. The small coastal town smelled like salt and rust and blooming things. Oliver kept his sunglasses on as he stepped out of the rental car, standing across the street from the repair shop that matched the photo. The sign was hand-painted, a little faded, with Reynolds Auto Repair carved into weathered wood. There was no neon, no modern branding, no attempt to impress, just a modest building with open garage doors and the sound of tools clinking steadily beneath the radio playing old country song. He stood there for a while, hands in his coat pockets, watching. Charles was in the middle of replacing a tire for an elderly woman whose car looked older than both of them. He smiled as he worked, talking to her the whole time. She laughed at something he said, swatted his arm like they were old friends. When the job was done, she pulled out her wallet, but Charles shook his head and waved it off. The woman tried again, but he just winked, and helped her into the car. She drove off smiling. A group of kids rode by on their bikes, their voices loud and full of sunshine. One of them shouted, "Hey, Mr. Reynolds!" And Charles called back, "Don't crash those bikes, or I'll charge you double for repairs." The kids whooped and pedaled faster. Charles just shook his head, laughing to himself, wiping grease from his hands with an old cloth. Oliver had no idea what to do with what he was seeing. This man, his brother, was nothing like the sharp lines and cold rooms Oliver had built his life around. Charles looked settled. Not in the way of someone who had given up, but in the way of someone who had figured out what mattered and planted roots there. He moved with ease, without tension in his shoulders. He didn't check his phone. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. He was just there, present in the small details of an ordinary day. Oliver stayed behind the safety of distance, pretending to scroll through messages on his phone, though he wasn't reading any of them. His suit jacket felt too stiff, his shoes too clean. He didn't belong on this street, not with its cracked sidewalks and windblown porches and neighbors who knew each other by name. He had worked so hard for his world, for the skyscrapers and the strategy meetings, the control and the clean design. But standing there now, watching the only family he had left hand out kindness like it cost him nothing, Oliver felt something ache inside him. A hollow place he'd ignored for years now echoed with the question he didn't know how to answer. How do you walk back into a life you abandoned, before you even understood what you were leaving? The distance across the street wasn't far, but to Oliver, it might as well have been a lifetime. He didn't cross it. Not yet. He just stood there, watching, remembering, aching for what was lost and for what might still be found. The office was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that settled deep into the corners and made every ticking second feel louder than it should. Oliver sat at his desk, unread emails blinking on his screen, calls going unanswered. He couldn't focus. Not on reports, not on contracts, not on the launch they were supposed to finalize by the end of the week. None of it mattered the way it had a few days ago. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Serena stepped in with her usual composure, holding a flat envelope in one hand. "Claire dropped this off. Said it was from Lottie." Oliver took the envelope without saying a word. Serena hesitated like she wanted to ask something, but then she nodded once and quietly stepped back out, leaving him alone with whatever Lottie had decided to send him this time. He opened it slowly, carefully, as if the paper might dissolve in his hands. Inside was a folded sheet of thick drawing paper, the edges slightly curled from small fingers. He unfolded it. There they were, 3 stick figures under the same wide tree Lottie had drawn before, but this time, something had changed. The tallest figure stood on the left, the smallest in the middle, and another slightly shorter one on the right. Each had a name written above in wobbly crayon letters. Me, Charlie, Ollie. His breath caught somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. She'd drawn herself between them, holding both of their hands. There was no explanation, no note, just the drawing, and the quiet message it carried. He stared at it for a long time. The names, the tree, the way she'd drawn Charlie smiling, the way all 3 of them were connected, even if they didn't realize it yet. Lottie didn't know the whole story. Not really. She didn't know what Charlie meant to him, didn't know how many years had passed since their last goodbye. But somehow, she felt the pieces. She dreamt them, drew them, placed herself right in the middle as if she belonged there. And maybe, Oliver thought, maybe she did. He ran his thumb over the paper, his heart moving in a way that had nothing to do with business or success. It was simpler, warmer. He didn't know how Lottie saw what she saw, but she had connected dots no adult had even thought to look for. She had drawn her truth, without hesitation or fear, and handed it to him like it was the most natural thing in the world. She had no idea how much that drawing meant. No idea that she had just given him the one thing he hadn't been able to find on his own. Permission. A quiet, childlike kind of permission. To stop hiding. To stop questioning whether it was too late. To stop standing across the street hoping something would change on its own. Oliver folded the drawing and placed it in his jacket pocket. The same pocket where the first drawing had lived for days. He was done waiting. It was time to cross the street. The bell above the door rang softly as Oliver stepped into the repair shop. The smell of oil and metal thick in the air. Sunlight spilled through the high windows, catching on the dust in the air and the worn tools hanging neatly on the wall. For a moment, he stood just inside the entrance, heart pounding, unsure what he'd say once the words started coming. Across the room, bent over the open hood of an old truck, was a man with dark, tousled hair streaked with gray. He wiped his hands with a rag, glanced up casually, and froze. Oliver didn't speak. He couldn't. Not yet. Charlie slowly set the rag down. His posture straightened, his eyes narrowing as if trying to make sense of something that shouldn't be real. The scar beneath his chin caught the light. The same small mark Oliver remembered from all those years ago, just a little deeper now, faded by time, but not forgotten. They stared at each other for a long time, not speaking, both of them caught in the heavy silence that only comes when the past finally steps into the room. Charlie was the first to say something, voice low and disbelieving. "Ollie?" The name broke something loose in Oliver's chest. He nodded slowly, trying to swallow past the knot in his throat. "It's me." Charlie let out a breath that sounded more like a question than a statement. He stepped forward, wiping his hands again out of habit. As if the grease mattered. As if the moment would be cleaner if he could just scrub it away. They stood just a few feet apart now, eyes locked, each one searching the other for traces of the boy he used to know. "You got taller," Charlie said after a beat. "You got older," Oliver replied, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, well," Charlie said, his voice still rough with disbelief. "So did you." Another silence fell, not cold this time, but careful. Like neither one wanted to say the wrong thing and ruin what they'd waited their whole lives to get back. Oliver gestured toward the small office at the side of the shop. "Can we sit?" Charlie nodded and led the way, the door creaking slightly as it opened. They sat across from each other at a cluttered desk, the hum of a fan filling the background. Oliver looked at his brother and saw the years between them, lines around his eyes, a tiredness in his shoulders, but also the familiar things, the way he drummed his fingers when he was thinking, the way his brow creased when something didn't make sense. "I didn't think I'd ever find you," Oliver said quietly. "I didn't think you'd ever look." That hit harder than he expected. Oliver looked down, folding his hands together. "I didn't know how." Charlie nodded slowly. "I get it." They sat in that small room, not as strangers, not quite as brothers yet, but as two people holding pieces of the same old story. The words would come later, the questions, the anger, the explanations, but for now they sat together in the quiet, letting the past catch up, one breath at a time. The small office was warm and still, the hum of the shop fading behind the closed door. Oliver sat across from his brother, feeling both too big and too small in the worn wooden chair. Charlie leaned back slowly, arms crossed, like he needed a little space to hold everything that had just happened. For a while neither of them spoke, the air thick with what they hadn't said for 25 years. Oliver finally broke the silence, his voice low and careful. "Do you remember that night? The one when they came and took you?" Charlie looked at him, something old flickering in his eyes. "Of course I do. You were holding my hand so tight, I thought we were both going to disappear." Oliver nodded, the memory still sharp. "I told you I wouldn't let them separate us." Charlie gave a soft laugh, more sad than amused. "Yeah, I believed you. I was 4, but I believed every word." There was no bitterness in his tone, only the kind of tired understanding that comes after too much time has passed to be angry. "I tried," Oliver said quietly. "After they moved me, I asked every social worker. I begged them to tell me where you were. But no one ever answered. I know, Charlie said. I tried too. I asked about you every chance I got. They kept saying you'd been adopted, that it was better for me to let it go. Oliver's jaw tightened. I wasn't adopted. I bounced around for another 4 years. Charlie leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. I wrote letters, he said. For years. Every Christmas. Every birthday. I gave them to caseworkers, teachers, anyone who said they could help. I didn't know where you were, but I thought maybe one of them would find you. Oliver's breath caught. I never got any. Charlie looked down at his hands, his fingers stained with grease and time. I figured that out eventually, that they probably just threw them away. Neither of them spoke after that for a long while. There wasn't much to say. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of all the moments they'd missed, the birthdays spent apart, the questions that had never been answered. It was full of the promises they'd made when they were too young to understand what the world could take from them. Oliver reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the most recent drawing from Lottie. He unfolded it slowly, placing it on the desk between them. Charlie looked down at it, his brow furrowing. That's her, Oliver said. Her name's Lottie. She's in foster care now. Claire's taking care of her. Charlie nodded, still studying the drawing. She looks happy in it. She dreams things, Oliver added. Things she shouldn't know. She drew you before I even remembered your name. Charlie looked up, eyes meeting his. Then maybe she was meant to bring us back together. Maybe, Oliver thought. And maybe some stories find their way home, even after everything that should have broken them apart. The sun was low when Oliver returned to the community center. The halls smelled faintly of old books and floor polish, the kind of scent that never fully left places like this. Claire was closing up for the day, stacking lesson plans into a plastic folder and sipping the last of her lukewarm tea. She looked up when she saw him, not surprised, but thoughtful, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She found you, didn't she? Claire asked quietly. He nodded, lowering himself into the chair across from her desk. He's alive. He runs a small repair shop, lives quiet, seems good. Claire gave a soft smile, the kind that didn't ask for details. I'm glad. Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, She knew things, Claire. About me. About him. Long before I said anything. How? Claire sat back, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window for a moment, then back at him with something that felt more like confession than explanation. There's something I haven't told you, she said. About Lottie. Oliver leaned in slightly, sensing the shift. She draws a lot, Claire began. You've seen that. But she doesn't always draw what she sees. She draws what she dreams. And her dreams, they're different. How different? Claire hesitated, choosing her words. She dreams in pictures, full scenes, people she's never met, places she's never been. Sometimes she wakes up and describes them in such detail. I wonder how any child could imagine it. I used to think it was just her way of processing things, trauma maybe, or just a vivid imagination. But after she drew you, after she said your name, and then your brother's, she stopped, watching him. Now I'm not so sure. Oliver let that settle. His instinct was to resist it, to push it away as coincidence, as fantasy. But something inside him had shifted. Too many lines had connected. Too many details had matched. Even now, he could feel the weight of the crayon drawing in his coat pocket, Lottie's handwriting, her certainty. She's never met me before that mixer, he said. And she's never seen Charlie. No, Claire confirmed. But she spoke about you long before that night. Said she dreamed of a boy named Ollie. Said he had sad eyes and wore suits and worked too much. I thought she'd seen you on the news or something. But then she started drawing the tree, the house. She said the little boy in her dream used to push his brother on the swing. Oliver sat back, the chair creaking softly beneath him. Claire's voice lowered. I don't pretend to understand it. But Lottie, she sees people in ways the rest of us can't. Maybe it's her way of remembering things no one ever told her. Or maybe she's just open in a way that adults forget how to be. He didn't speak for a long time. He just let the truth hang in the air, as strange and quiet and powerful as the girl who had drawn his broken past back into the light. The guest room at the end of the hall had always been just that. A guest room. A sterile space with white linens, pale gray curtains, and a side table that held nothing personal, just a lamp and a scented candle no one ever lit. It had been used twice in the last 5 years, once by a business associate who left before breakfast, and once by a cousin who only stayed because her flight got canceled. Oliver had walked past it 1,000 times and never once looked inside with any real intention. But now, the door stood open, and everything was different. The walls had been painted a soft yellow, not bright but warm, the kind of color that reminded him of morning light. A rug with blues and greens lay across the floor, and a low bookshelf had been added under the window, filled with picture books, fairy tales, and stacks of coloring pads. A small desk sat in the corner with cups full of sharpened crayons, pencils, and markers arranged neatly but with enough freedom for little hands to make a mess. There was a bean bag in one corner and a window seat with pillows in shades of pink, lavender, and sky blue. Oliver stood in the doorway, unsure why it felt so strange to see a room in his home that wasn't designed for perfection, but for comfort. He'd hired a decorator to help, yes, but he'd made every decision. He'd picked the colors. He'd approved the art on the walls, a framed print of a tree with its roots shaped like hands, and another of a swaying under a blue sky. He hadn't wanted it to feel like a project. He wanted it to feel like an invitation. When Claire arrived with Lottie a few days later, the girl bounded in with her usual quiet energy, taking in every corner of the room without speaking. Her fingers brushed over the desk, then the books, then the pillows, as if checking whether it was real. Then she turned to Oliver and smiled, not the polite smile she gave at the office, but a full one, wide and bright and true. This is my room, she said simply, like it had always belonged to her. Oliver felt something shift in his chest at those words. Not a pang, not a tug, something fuller. A weight that had been sitting quietly inside him for years, moved just enough for him to breathe differently. He nodded, unable to trust his voice. Claire watched from the hallway, her eyes softer than usual. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. She saw it too. Later that afternoon, Lottie sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing with a crayon pressed firmly in her small hand. Oliver passed by the door and paused when he heard her humming to herself, completely at ease. He didn't know when it had happened, when she stopped being a link to his past and started becoming something else entirely. But in that moment, watching her surrounded by color and comfort and safety, he understood. She wasn't just a memory come to life. She was a beginning. The dining room felt different that night, though nothing dramatic had changed. The long table was the same, polished to a shine, with soft lights glowing overhead. The silverware still rested on crisp linen napkins. The plates were still white porcelain, but the air held something new, something warmer. Oliver sat at the head of the table, not out of habit this time, but because Lottie insisted. Claire sat to his right, her laughter soft and frequent, and across from him, Charlie leaned back in his chair, with the easy comfort of someone who had finally been welcomed home. And between them all was Lottie, legs swinging under her chair, her mouth full of mashed potatoes, a crayon tucked behind one ear, for reasons she hadn't explained. They had talked, all of them, more in the last week than Oliver had in most of his adult life. Not just about the past, though it came up in waves, gentle, rough, but always honest. Charlie had told stories about foster homes and near misses, about the small acts of kindness that got him through. Oliver had filled in the blanks from his side, admitting how long he'd buried it all. How hard it was to feel anything for so long. They didn't talk about forgiveness. They didn't need to. The fact that they were sitting here, passing bowls of roasted vegetables, and laughing over Lottie's very serious opinions on green beans, said more than apologies ever could. After dinner, while Claire was helping clear the plates, and Charlie poured everyone tea from a chipped blue kettle he brought from his shop, Oliver disappeared into the study for a moment. When he returned, he was holding a frame. Simple. Wood. Nothing flashy. Inside it was the first drawing Lottie had ever given him. The crooked yellow house, the stick figures labeled Lottie and Ollie, the sky that took up half the page, colored in with determined blue strokes. It had been folded for weeks, carried from pocket to drawer, smoothed out more times than he could count. But now it sat clean and still in the frame, like it had always been waiting for a place to belong. He walked to the mantel, beside a faded photo of his parents, the only picture he had of them, both young and tired, their arms around two small boys on a front porch, somewhere far away. He placed the drawing right beside it. No one spoke for a moment. Even Lottie stayed quiet, her eyes wide as she looked at her framed picture. Then she smiled, soft and proud. "That's where it goes," she said. "Next to your old family." Oliver looked down at her. "You're my family too." Lottie nodded, already pulling another crayon from her pocket. "Good. Then I'll draw a new one. All of us. In the same picture this time." Claire laughed, and Charlie raised his teacup like a toast. They hadn't erased the years they'd lost. They couldn't. But they were here now, together. And this time, they weren't just remembering the past. They were drawing a new story. One with space for all of them. One that started with crayons and ended with something whole. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more powerful stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.